I'll go ahead and pre-apologize for how long-winded I am. I was born like this, I'm sorry. Hello everyone, my name is Matt. I am a humble follower of Christ, and right now I just wanted to make like a short video on discipleship. That's kind of my shtick. Like that's where I land in this skew of like people who have degrees and like to talk about Christ. Like, I like spiritual formation, I guess. Currently, like specifically the idea of discipleship in forms of ideals and like practical, right? So the difference between what is maybe an optimal or what is standard even and what is where we are right now. Like the first example that comes to mind is the idea of like a budget. I can say that I'm gonna spend $500 on meals this month, but do I actually execute on that? Do I actually do that thing? The difference between like what the plan is and what is like really good and building and nice, but like what we can actually execute on, or even what we physically can do, or what we actually ended up doing that month. And that's not to say that discipleship is some sort of checklist, like you have to make a budget, and if you don't fulfill that, you didn't hit the mark. Like, I don't think any pastor should tell you that, and if they do, I kind of think they're wrong in some ways. Like maybe there's a conversation to be had there, but it's for sure not if you don't tithe 10%, like you're not a follower of Christ, or if you don't come to church every Sunday, like you're like, you know, hit you with the Bible. I don't know. Like at best they're exaggerating, and at worst they're lying to you. I think the conversation is a lot more nuanced than that. Discipleship is not something that is a set of a checklist to mark off to say we did them. It is deeper and a lot more nuanced. But what I want to talk about right now is kind of just the difference between those two things, between this ideal and the practical. At church right now, we're going through a 6-week series. We do it every January. We've done it for the past 3 years, and our lead pastor kind of walks us through these 6 weeks of our practices. And each one gets, you know, its own week. There's 6 practices, it gets 6 weeks. These practices include things like worship, prayer, storytelling, equipping and empowering others, making room for others, and community building. Those practices really shape and form how we like participate, and they have ideals behind them, right? And we have this little handout, and it's got in the in the Y column, it has the 6 practices: practice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then in that, you know, X axis, it has time slots, so daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, and so on, and it just makes like a little grid. And I love this handout. I think it's an amazing tool, an amazing resource. And it's something that is like simple. It allows us to put our commitments on a piece of paper, to recall them, to reflect on them. It's awesome. In all reality, it is a fantastic tool. But one of the things I like overheard was that it's just a lot. And on face value, it is. Like you have 6 different practices, and they're not they're a little more ambivalent, if you will, like worship, right? And then you have to figure out a way to do that daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. And like there's the yearly and the monthly and even the weekly in that particular category are kind of easy to slot in. Like you can just say church or specific events and so on. But sometimes finding things daily and finding daily things for all of those is taxing, is difficult. It's a lot upon initial appearance. And I'm trying to think about this from like different perspectives, right? Like I've been following Christ for 15 years, but like, what about someone who's like brand new to this? Like if I was to approach this as like, I've been following Jesus for 2 seconds or 2 months or whatever, it's a lot. It looks like, it doesn't, I guess it kind of does look like a checklist, but it's like, it's a lot of commitment up front, right? And it's like, as we're working through it and there's only like a few weeks to like get to it, we're doing the best we can with it because we do this repetitively each year, and things will catch up, and that's not the problem, right? But like the face value of it is a lot. And like, I try to think about that, like what does that look like from that? Is that a big thing to commit to? And like even someone who's been following Christ for decades or eons. Some people have been doing that for eons. But someone who's been doing it for a long time and then has to like go like, oh man, I really want to renew my commitments to all these things, but the financial burden, I'm on fixed income, the whatever, right? The time commitment, the ability to even do it in some ways. Like I'm wheelchair bound, or I have disabilities, and it's like we have to find creative ways to get through that, and that takes time and it takes effort, and it's a lot, and it's scary on face value. I also have this conflicting thought, right? That like ideals are, well, they're ideals, they're nice, right? They're pretty, they're valuable, just as valuable as the practical, like just as valuable as looking at where I am and what I can actually do right now. The ideals, have value, right? That we can say that there is something that we should be doing. And like in this specific context, right, in the context of being a disciple of Christ, the context of wanting to worship better, ideals they're important, right? Like people prayed things, they did things, and there's instructions. Like there's some things that we want to stick to. I think our challenge really is not trying to defend ideas or defend ideals or standards or whatever you want to call them, or defend what we can actually do in the moment, right? But more not trying to break those things down or delete either one of them, but rather trying to pull our practical, what we're currently doing, the actual actionable steps we can do to become better disciples with Christ, and push those day by day closer to the ideal. It's a slightly more nuanced conversation. Now, to execute on that, you obviously have to know the ideal, and you have to have known where you are currently. And I think those two things are two different videos, and I don't have time to cover them right now. However, we'll get there. What I'm thinking about today, especially from the perspective of starting, is I want to remind us of baby steps. Like when you were young, you didn't come out of the womb sprinting, going to work every day, being a mom or a dad, right? Like you came out and you couldn't form words. You could cry, you can make noises potentially, but like you had to develop these things. You had to crawl, you had to roll over before you did that. You had to then maybe start walking, maybe your head just carried you wherever you were going. And then you had to actually do the running. We have to develop these things one at a time. And I think a lot of things in our lives play out like this. We grow in a way. What I mean by that is like, let's let it crawl, let's then let it walk, and then let's let it run, and let it progress through each one of those things. Kind of a strange image to think about your own discipleship crawling, but let's progress the analogy. See, the funny thing is I think this plays out whether you've been following Christ for 2 minutes or 200 years. The image that I get is that of going to the gym, right? If you're new to the gym, you've never lifted in your life before, it would just be unwise to try to go to the gym, put 400 pounds on a bar, get underneath it, and try to back squat it. Simply unwise. The same is true if you've squatted 400 pounds before, but it was 10 years ago. And you're trying to get back in the rhythms of doing these things, but it would be equally as unwise for you to just hit it day one and get under the bar and try to squat it. Like, you're gonna hurt yourself. It may take a few months, it may take a few years for you to progress back to where you were one day. If you haven't maintained doing all these things constantly, it's a muscle you haven't flexed, and we're humans. We're allowed to we're allowed to use body parts in our brains and stuff like that. It is allowed to grow. It is allowed to be where it is, and it is allowed to progress. That's an okay idea. So like, we don't have to show up to the gym on day one and go 0 to 400, but if we're trying to squat, we have to squat, right? Like, you don't have, if you're not currently tithing, you don't have to go from 0% to 10% or more immediately right now. That may be scary, especially if you're on fixed income, especially if you have kids, especially if you're in a weird job situation, or if you don't have a job or whatever. Like, it is not about you going from 0 to 10% and keeping that 10% and trying to check that box. It is about you learning how to give faithfully and to be gracious. That is the task. Let's learn that. And it's an ambiguous thing. It's not something that's as straightforward as just saying 10%, that's easy, like auto draft, done. That's not what we're going after. We're going after trying to bring our practical closer to the ideal. That ideal, obviously being Christ, we'll get there, I promise. But we're trying to just mosey in that direction, right? We're trying to enjoy that journey to get there. And it may look like tithing 1%. It may look like tithing 2%. And I pick on tithing because tithing is a really easy illustration, but like same thing could go with like the practice of Sabbath. Like we don't have to go from 0 to 24 hours every single week. If we're not currently doing it, it's a rhythm that we don't have. We have to build that rhythm. The important thing is that we're learning to rest in the peace of the Lord. It is not trying to fulfill a very specific timeline or a very specific thing. It is about bringing our relationship closer. I want to be fair in this to the ideal, right? Like I appreciate the ideals. The ideals are important. We're not trying to lower that bar. Like I promise you, the deeper your relationship is with Christ, the more that you allow yourself to be conformed and move towards Christ likeness, that the more joyful, peaceful, and loving your life is. That is where hope is. That is where power is. That is where love is. I believe that is where kingdom on earth today is. I wouldn't be standing here talking to you or have spent thousands of dollars on degrees or study and so on if I didn't believe that. See, our goal is not to optimize that. It's not to optimize the timeline. It's not to get there immediately. It is to bring our relationship closer to Christ. And see, I think that gap between ideal and practical is, that's the fun part. That's the sauce right there. That when we enjoy to learn the journey, when we enjoy to pull those two things together, like that's love, that's discipleship, that's sanctification, that's allowing your life to be transformed by Christ. That's the goal. The goal is not to get to the ideal. The goal is to experience Him and to be in relationship with Him until we become to ideal. And that can be scary at face value. There's a lot of things on that list, but it's not about fulfilling the list. It's about enjoying the journey. And so taking one baby step at a time, and really the only thing you need to do is start. And starting can be scary, but you're not going to regret it. But hey, this was a quick video. I just spun up the camera and talked to it. But if you enjoyed this type of content or whatever, this is kind of a new thing for me. I'm just trying to keep my practice up. Feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, all that fun YouTube stuff that people say at the end of videos to make things happen. Talk to me. I like being talked to. I'm an extrovert. Let's do this thing. If you think I'm wrong, if you disagree, dislike it, comment too. I don't care. Like, that's fine. It's the internet. I know things are gonna happen, but again, nuanced conversations. Let's keep it there. Hey, either way, you're loved. So I'll see you next time.